My name is Reena. I am the host of the Wise Women series, and I'm absolutely delighted to have all of you join us. And thank you for all your messages thus far. Uh, you are seeing a slide up there. I promise this is not going to be a slideshow, but this is a knowledge session. So we will be using a few slides. And hopefully you're going to get a chance to get some knowledge from them, but also more importantly, you're going to gain a lot of knowledge from our wonderful speakers today. So from this slide that's there, I really want to say two things. One is the Wise Women series is part of the Butterfly Movement, which is run by my company, and we are on a mission. And the mission that we are on is to empower mid-career women, because we truly believe at this moment of time, and I'm putting a stake in the ground right here, I think at this moment of time, we all recognize with the socio-economic, political, climatic strife that we are in the need of transformational leaders. And we do believe that actually working with mid-career women and offering the right knowledge, insights, and tools, they can actually pivot and use this moment as an inflection point. And we are very excited about that possibility. My area of specialization is applied neuroscience and leadership development. So we have brought all of those insights into designing this program, but also in all the narrative that you're going to be seeing. So we are very, very excited to launch the Wise Women series today, which is a 4-part series. Now, what is this all about? The Wise Women series, like a very quick recap. It's 4 events that are taking place, and it's a narrative that we're going to run over the 4 events. They are almost like an onion that's going to be unpacked. So I hope that you're going to be watching the recording, if not joining us live for all of them. We start today talking about redefining menopause care, because when we're talking about transformational leaders, let's face it, the first thing we need to get right is our health. And we do know that mid-career women, if not already experiencing menopause, will be experiencing menopause. So it's good for us to talk about it. I'm extremely grateful for some people who are supporting this entire series. We've got the Executive Coaching Consultancy, which is a coaching consultancy which specializes on gender. We've got Let's Talk Menopause, which is all about having the right kind of conversations with men, with women, with the wider society around menopause. We've got Menopause Matters, which is an award-winning magazine, which has actually gone digital this year. So it's going global in its reach, which is fantastic. And we have got 2 amazing female networks that work in male-dominated sectors, Powerful Women and Lean In and Equity and Sustainability. So what we're hoping that people are going to get out of this program are 3 things. Gaining clarity, which is actually a neuroscience principle, because the more you're clear, less is the dissonance, and more you're able to use the right kind of energy and make the right kind of decisions. We're going to hope that by the end of the entire conversation, you're going to feel energized, because not only are we going to talk about neurobiology, but also hopefully in the safe space, you're going to get a chance to feel energized and be empowered. So that's really the narrative over the whole series. And today we're talking about redefining menopause care. So what's our narrative today? We're going to start right from the basics, because I'm sure a lot of people know about menopause, but I have had some people who reached out to us from the people who have registered saying, I've never had a conversation about menopause. So we're going to start with talking about what is menopause. We're going to take on head on some of the symptoms, complication, dispel some of the myths. We're going to talk about the HRT, the hormone replacement therapy. There are lots of myths around it. We're going to talk about hormonal, non-hormonal therapies. We're going to talk about menopause care in the workplace, but we are also going to take a wider holistic view. And we're going to today introduce the topic of Ayurveda and how that could perhaps provide you a line of sight around menopause care. We're also going to talk about gut nutrition, and we're going to close it off with neuroscience and neurobiology. Now, our wonderful speakers today, I know you have seen their bios many a times, because I've been sending you reminders to say who's joining us, and they might actually give a statement as well when they start speaking about what they do. But let me just tell you from what angle they're coming. Heather works in NHS, and she's got many, many accolades around the work that she does on menopause. She's going to bring in the medical angle into this entire conversation. Sunita Pasi is an expert in Ayurveda. She's a practitioner. She runs a business around Ayurveda. So she's going to bring the Ayurvedic angle to it. Maria works in this field of neuroscience and neurobiology. So she's going to bring her insights from that aspect. Nigel, who had a chance to meet up in the BMS Annual Scientific Conference, and he's a specialist in nutrition and health and gut health. So he's going to be taking that angle because, of course, we know that's a huge area of concern for women. And last but not the least, we've got Amantha, who knows a lot about this topic and has got many hats on. But today she's going to bring in some really unique insights, being a workplace menopause consultant. So her expertise is going to be quite good for today's conversation. Now, this is a Zoom session, and we have all attended Zoom sessions in the past. Well, let me just remind ourselves of some norms that we're going to follow. Please ask questions to clarify your understanding. The way to do it is raise hands to ask a question during the Q&A section, which will be after about half an hour in this chat, or you can just type it out in the chat message. Mute your mic unless you're speaking. If not, I'm supporting by Emma, whose picture you can see on the slide. And so we apologize in advance. If there's feedback coming from your mic, we might mute you. If you are speaking, then please do switch on your camera. We'd love to put a face to the voice. If there is any disruptions, we will, again, with apologies in advance, exit you from the room. And of course, last but not the least, we will send the recording to you. And any questions or comments you have, please send it to hello@thecollaborators. That being said, I'm not going to be in great hands of asking questions of our wonderful people. So I'm going to show you one slide, and then I'm going to open up the conversation with Heather. And I just want you to focus on those three words that are out there: estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. We've been hearing about these words, these chemicals, these hormones. So my first question to Heather is, can you just tell us what really is happening during menopause in the female body? And what are they, the 3 phases or 4 phases? What's the story? So Heather, over to you.
Okay, so the menopause is the final period. And we only know we've had our final period by having 12 months without a period. So it's one point in a transition of which there are a number of phases. So when our ovaries are working completely normally, developing an egg, a few eggs, one dominant egg usually takes over in the ovaries, that's then released. And at that time, there is the potential for pregnancy. But at the end of the cycle, in the absence of pregnancy, the hormone levels drop and the lining of the womb comes away, which is a period. So our periods are really telling us what our ovaries are doing. And it's our ovaries can only work normally with this egg production and development and production of the really important hormones, estrogen and progesterone, if there are enough egg cells. Unfortunately, we have a finite number of egg cells and they run out. So we don't make new egg cells. We have the maximum number before we are born. And even by birth and then before puberty, before we start developing these ones each month, then there is a reduction. And gradually over the years, we got to the point where there are egg cells are both so low in quality and low in number that our ovaries stop this egg development and essentially stop the production of estrogen. It is very unusual to have a completely normal cycle and then without any sign at all, you suddenly think, oh, haven't had a period for 6 months. It's much more usual that you have this transitioning phase, which is called the perimenopause, which is basically when it all goes a bit wonky. And that can start in our mid-40s, even our early 40s, or even younger. And at that time, we're not expecting anything menopausal-ish to be happening because we're too young, and that's something that happens to much older people. So often symptoms of the change in the function of the ovaries due to these eggs getting older is quite subtle and kind of creeps up on us. And the first thing that might happen is period pattern changing. But along with that, we might start to get the early symptoms of becoming low on estrogen. And while the menopause is the final period, we use that term to cover everything related to what's happening. But really what we're talking about is changing levels and gradually decreasing levels and then low levels of estrogen. And the why periods stop is because without estrogen, then the lining of the womb isn't stimulated to be thickened to receive a fertilized egg and then be shed as happens in a normal cycle. So our periods stop because our ovaries produce less and less estrogen. So everything before that in the normal cycle phase is called premenopause. Everything after the final period is called postmenopause. And there's a bit in between in that crazy time, which is called perimenopause. And at that time, it's just all over the place. I always use my hand here because that's what it does. But actually, just to confuse us further, we might have a few months when we're starting to have a change in periods, when we're starting to have symptoms of becoming lower on estrogen. And then it's okay again because our ovaries perk up and actually are okay. So it's a very, very confusing time. Once we get to postmenopause, when our baseline level of estrogen is low and stays low, it's much easier to understand what's going on. So that's basically what's happening at menopause. We run out of eggs, we become low in estrogen in a fluctuating, gradual way, and then our estrogen levels remain low. And when we talk about consequences of menopause, which is related to symptoms and long-term health effects, it's all due to the changing and then low level of estrogen.
Great. Thank you for that. And tell us a little bit about progesterone. What's
So
happening there?
progesterone is what we normally produce in the second half of our cycle after we've released the egg. And again, that also decreases because our ovaries are then not producing eggs, not releasing eggs. So the other way, so it's part of the normal cycle. But when we start to think about hormone replacement therapy, so when we accept that the consequences are due to becoming low in estrogen, it kind of makes sense that for some women who are having troublesome symptoms, they may look into the option of replacing the estrogen, and that's the aim of hormone replacement therapy. So the main part of it is estrogen. If we just gave estrogen on its own, it can do lots of helpful things. It's not needed by everyone, but it can be helpful. But the main problem it can cause is a stimulation and a thickening of the lining of the womb, known as the endometrium. And eventually, if we just replaced estrogen on its own, it could increase the risk of cancer of the lining of the womb. So when we're using HRT, unless the womb has been totally removed, progestogen, the man-made version of progesterone, is added into the HRT along with estrogen to protect the lining of the womb. So the two aspects of progesterone, one is we produce it normally in the second half of our cycle after we've released the egg, and then we have to use it as part of HRT when we're taking estrogen to protect the lining of the womb. And the third hormone you mentioned was testosterone. So there's a lot of focus on, if we're taking HRT, we should also replace testosterone. Testosterone doesn't suddenly fall at the time of the menopause. Testosterone is produced both by our ovaries and by our adrenal glands. And there's a gradual reduction from our early 30s. So it kind of doesn't make much sense to me to think that we have to replace that as well around the time of menopause when our estrogen levels are falling. There is a role of it for some women who may have, the only recommendation is persistent, troublesome, low libido after all other factors have been addressed. And often the symptoms of menopause, if they are managed by whatever way that is, then that in itself, feeling better, generally can improve libido. Female sexual function is incredibly complex. There's no correlation whatsoever between levels of testosterone, because we do keep producing it after we've stopped producing estrogen, and our libido, but it has a role in some women as a trial. But there is a lot of focus on testosterone at the moment, and I kind of would prefer the focus to go back to the basics of replacing estrogen when indicated.
Awesome. All right, great. So now you've been talking a little bit about symptoms. You okay, Heather? Yeah. I know you've been like on the roll on answering that question. Thank you for that. So we have been talking about these, and you touched upon symptoms. So I'm going to flash up a slide because I know you and I had this conversation. Now here are two lists. So for a person like me who's going on the internet and thinking, all right, am I menopausal or not? And I kind of type in of saying, what's the symptoms? There is a huge variety available. So there can be things like on the right-hand side, which can have a whole list of it. I just had somebody send me a link of said, no, hundreds of symptoms that can happen during menopause. And then you have this rather much more shorter list. So tell us about symptoms, because some of those might happen with age, some of them might happen with menopause. What's the story? How does a woman know?
So the story is that there are estrogen receptors throughout the body. And so the lack of estrogen, first the changing level, and then the lack of estrogen can trigger all sorts of reactions throughout the body. The key thing is there is huge variation between every single woman in terms of the type of symptoms that they get, the severity of the symptoms, the duration of the symptoms, and most importantly of all, the impact. So, two women will not have the same type of symptoms or impact. And when it comes round to looking at how are we going to manage this, how are we going to control our symptoms and improve our later health as much as possible, invest in our health, there is no two women that will find the same path that's right for them. It's a very, very individualized. So the list on the shorter list are the fairly common symptoms of menopause. About 75% of women have some symptoms. That means 25% don't actually have any at all. And of those that have symptoms, about 25% are quite severe symptoms that are quite troublesome, and everyone else is somewhere in between. So if it was purely about becoming low in estrogen, we would all be affected in exactly the same way, but we're clearly not. And therefore, it's not just about the lack of estrogen, it's around a whole load of other things, which is why non-hormonal options can be really helpful, because it's around our lifestyle, it's around life stresses and how we deal with them, it's around our mindset, it's around how much exercise we have, it's around cultures and taboos and whether we approach it positively or negatively. There are just a load of things. The other thing that's important to know in that long list, many of these symptoms are going to happen for people for various reasons that's not hormonally related. And with so much increased awareness and focus on menopause now, I do see some women that have completely normal menstrual cycles, no change whatsoever, and are feeling sore breasts, tired, anxious, irritable, constipation, weight gain. It's not necessarily hormonally related. And so it's not correct to then assume, oh, I can tick those things on the list, this must be menopause, therefore I might consider taking HRT. It's important to get it back into context and perspective, as if we choose to take HRT, whatever management we do, that will help symptoms due to coming on low on estrogen, but it's not going to treat everything. And a lot of people have bad days, have bad times. And, the last 3 years, as we all know, have been so stressful in so many ways that HRT isn't going to be the answer to everything.
Great. So straight away, you've been busting a lot of myths about HRT, what causes it, what happens. It's very individual, but also means that the care should be individual. So
Yeah.
thank you for those whole host of messaging out there, Heather. That makes so much of sense. I'm going to just tee off from that point, Amantha, and come to you, because one of the myths that people have or people talk about, I don't know whether it's a myth or a belief, of saying, menopause happens in the 50s. That's when it happens. And some people are like, no, it happens in the 40s. So what's the story out there, Mantha? What have you seen when you are kind of interacting with so many women in organization? When does menopause really start off? What have you seen? And could there be any other reason for menopause beyond just estrogen levels falling down? So tell us a bit around that, Amantha.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the simple answer is there's no straight line equation here. 1 + 1 does not equal 2 when it comes to the menopause transition. And my experience is very much around the cultural element, the genetic element. And we all have a different story. My own personal story is I became perimenopausal at 36, and at 52, I'm still perimenopausal. So I don't fit the normal mold or the narrative that we're seeing, and that's partly because I have a South Asian background. We know that people from South Asian backgrounds, people who are Black, will tend to have perimenopausal symptoms up to 5 years earlier than their white counterparts. But because there's a huge lack of clinical evidence and research, we're sort of largely left with a gaping hole. So it does require us to do more. So we sort of go with the socio cultural evidence that we get when we go into workplaces. And so what I would say to you is a lot of people can fall outside that bell curve. Some people will have it earlier, some people will have it much later. I think it's about empowering people to know what the symptoms are. We often talk about connecting the dots. So on average, people may have up to 8 symptoms for 14 months before they think, do you know what, I think I might go and see my doctor. So it's about people understanding what their normal looks like, and being open to the idea of what symptoms can present. And, you know, like you say, it depends where you look. Some can be 34, 50 symptoms. I've heard in some places up to 100 symptoms. But again, you know, hormones never exist in isolation. Our sex hormones reside alongside neurotransmitters. So these are the things that we need to consider. But coming back to a bit of data which might help people, there are other ways that people can actually go into menopause transition. I think the most obvious one for people under 40 is usually we might have people with surgical menopause. So if people have endometriosis, which is that proliferation of those endometrial tissues, they migrate into other places, other cavities, and then they respond to the stimulus of the estrogen hormone. And so my sister is one of these people. She had to have radical surgery. She had to have her ovaries removed, hysterectomy, full hysterectomy, and she had to have a partial resection of her gut, which involved having a stoma. So we know that people can arrive at it in multiple ways. So early menopause, which is classed as before 45 years, that's about a statistic of 1 in 100. It goes even further. We're seeing data, particularly with under 30s, 1 in 1,000 people under 30 can arrive in the menopause transition. And this can be viral infections, a blunt trauma, something that may have happened in that area, in that anatomical area. We are seeing information looking at COVID. The COVID pandemic is showing up a number of people who are in their late 30s, but who are experiencing perimenopausal symptoms. And of course, we've got the long COVID big question mark as well. When is it long COVID and when's it perimenopause? You know, the symptoms very much cross over. And probably the other group that I would like to mention is cancer. We know that cancer sits alongside the menopause conversation quite nicely, but actually, I don't know if people are aware that every time you embark on cancer treatment, you do have a menopause, because especially if you're having medication that blocks receptors, estrogen receptors, you are plunged into a medical menopause each time you have a round of treatment. So I have a number of clients who have 3 or 4 rounds of treatment every year. They're experiencing a radical surgical menopause each time that happens, and then their ovaries kick back in. So it can be a real roller coaster ride. So I hope that answers the question in terms of how might people arrive at this stage. And so on that bell curve, people will sit either side of that.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you, Amantha. And actually, what you're referring to, and also what Heather is referring to, which is taking us into perhaps the second part of our conversation, which is really around menopause care, having understood a little bit about what triggers it off and how it might actually arrive for a woman, which can be very unique from person to person, is how do we therefore look after ourselves and our health? And clearly what you've signaled, Heather, that it is not just about hormonal, it's about non-hormonal therapies as well. So we're already getting that whole feel about it's a holistic approach that needs to take place. But before we get into that, Amantha, I'm going to ask you for one important thing before we get into inviting Sunita to talk about the Ayurvedic angle to menopause, and I know that you're doing a lot of work right now in the workplace around menopause support. And one of the things that you and I talked about is, you know, can women actually look after themselves? And part of looking after themselves in the workplace is to be able to ask the kind of support you require in the organization. And so to be empowered and feel empowered to ask for that. And we know that we have got laws backing us as well. And also, I think so somewhere the butterfly movement is really about having that ripple effect. So looking after yourself, but how can you start creating a little bit of a ripple effect by asking some sensible questions of organizations and line managers? So to start off with that mindset about how do I look after myself and feel empowered, can you throw us a little bit of what you think might be the right questions and support that a woman can ask for in the workplace? And then we'll go into some elements of Ayurveda, nutrition, and neuroscience.
Yeah, so this is, you're not asking me to cover that slide that I've given.
I can actually.
If that's helpful, because if we could just
yes,
let's that's just flash that up for people to see. So basically, it's so important that you step away from tonight's call knowing that you have the law on your side, even though menopause hasn't got a protected characteristic in the eyes of the law. It is covered by the Equality Act and the Health and Safety at Work Act. So you're covered, and that's really powerful because it means you are in a position to ask questions. So to come to that point, I think the thing that most people have at the forefront of their mind in the workplace is fear. They think if they raise their head above the parapet, that's going to make me a victim of menopause, in that I'm going to be sidelined. I might have to step down. Is there an admission by saying or asking questions about menopause that there's a problem? I'm here to tell you it's quite the opposite. In fact, if you ask those questions, you're not just asking for your, in fact, you can ask a question that frames it as though you're asking it on behalf of others. It's not actually about you. You know, you can ask your employer, actually, bearing in mind we've just had World Menopause Day, what supports do we have in place for 51% of the population? Just curious to know that question. I often say to businesses, and it's a great jaw-dropping moment, if 51% of the population are all the women in this organisation who might be over 30, as I just explained to Reena, might be over 30 and under 60 or over 60, how many of those people are in our organisation right now? And what most people find is, conservatively, most businesses have 30% of their staff are in the menopausal category. So the question to ask is, what strategies have we got in place to prevent 30% of our top performers leaving? And also another great question is to say, where are they? One of the businesses that I've worked with, 70% of all menopausal people were in their operations team. Can you imagine if they all went tomorrow? And this is the point. We have a skills shortage in the UK. So you are asking great questions on behalf of many people. And just to say that you have the law on your side, and you can ask for things like reasonable adjustments, a reasonable support, anything that can be reasonable. So let's just pick a symptom. If you've got flooding, which 40% of all perimenopausal people experience, you can actually say, what supports can you put in place for me? I'm experiencing flooding. I want to be at work. I'm committed to my role. And it's not going to be a fan on a desk, is what I'm here to tell you. It's going to be something around, actually, do we have menstrual products available in all toilets? Is there somewhere for you to have a locker, to have a change of your clothing? Actually, if you're really bad, like I was during my perimenopause, I could not have been at work. So could you work from home on those days? Could you have an NHS type passport, which says you get 6 days a month? How you use those, but you're still productive. Can I have my camera off when we're on Zoom calls? Because you know what, I look a mess on the days that I'm at home struggling with my flooding. So there's so much you can do, but ask the questions, ask about risk adjustments, ask about reasonable supports, ask about where's our menopause policy. And actually, by the way, have we got any menopause champions here? Because it'd be really great to go and speak to one of those.
Fabulous. Thank you. Brilliant. So step one, stand up for yourself. And there's some really good ideas that have come in from Amantha on that one. And I know from a neuro angle, that can be hugely beneficial for an individual. Now I'm going to invite Sunita into this conversation, because what I'm really excited today is to bring in the Ayurvedic lens to menopause. Now, Ayurveda, for some of you all who are already aware of it, is an ancient science, 5,000 plus years old. And Sunita, one of the myths I'd like you to talk about is, what is Ayurveda? Because some people tell me, is it a religion that comes from India? I'm like, no. It's a science. Hold on a second. But it is very holistic. So can I give the mic to you for a little while just to tell us, what is Ayurveda? How would you explain it out? And what's the intersectionality between Ayurveda and menopause care?
Yeah, sure. So Ayurveda, yes, exactly as you said, Reena, it's a traditional Indian holistic health system. It's a medicine system, and it's ancient. So 5,000 years old. If you compare it to Chinese medicine, the two were evolving and developing at similar times. Ayurveda, slightly older. And Ayurveda is a Sanskrit word, and Aya means life, Veda means knowledge. So it's literally the science of life, and that's all encompassing. So when you think about that from a holistic perspective, it's considering your mind, your body, your soul, and really the practices are designed to help you maximize the spiritual and the physical benefits. And the sort of the toolkit, it's a toolkit that you can bring into your life. Where prevention is better than cure. That's really the optimum message that comes through Ayurveda. And when we look at those tools, the first thing that we would do, if you know, as a practitioner, is and again from a self-care perspective, something that you can easily do yourself by keeping a food diary, but is to have a look at what you're eating. So diet and nutrition is you know, the first and foremost to actually seeing the qualities of the food that you're eating as your body goes through this change. Other tools include herbal remedies. So there's certain formulations that you can take during this period in your life, which I'll come to in a minute. And also lifestyle modification. So things like self-care practices. So body work, and body work is focusing on your energy system. So, you know, on your body, you have many different vital points where energy can get stagnant and stuck. And from the Ayurvedic perspective, we look at the body as a field of energy where there's many pathways. There's many channels where the flow of energy, the flow of, again, using another Sanskrit word, prana, that energy can actually get stuck. And purification treatments, detoxification treatments, these are all really part of the self-care practices, really key during this time. And so how does it, so when you transition through the menopause, Ayurveda is really offering, it's a wisdom. So it's offering you, and what happens is in the body, from the Ayurvedic perspective, it's as a holistic system, it seeks to maintain balance, and it recognizes your individual constitution. So you may have heard of this now. It's becoming a lot more in the mainstream, this type of language, which is really good to see. But there are three key constitutions. Some of us are sort of purely one, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Some of us are a mix, and some of us may be tridoshic. And when we have a look at this, we can see that there's different elements. These elements all exist around us as part of nature, and this is also how we consider what the changes that are happening within us as well. So Vata, really, when Vata is in balance, Vata is the combination of the ether and the air elements. It's another Sanskrit word, and it means what moves. It's a moving energy in the body, and it promotes creativity. It promotes flexibility. When you look at fire and water make up the Pitta constitution. So you may recognize some of these qualities within you as I walk you through it. But Pitta really is about generating understanding. It's more about analytical ability. And then you have the Kapha constitution, which is much more grounded. It's earth with a little bit of water, and that's more promoting more stability. It's more generosity, it's open-heartedness. So it's certain qualities that you can see there. And when during menopause, there's a shift in the doshas, and we're also looking at the body in the sense that we're moving from what we consider to be a Pitta phase, which is where there's a lot of fire energy in the body, because that's what enables you to build in your life, to do the things that you do during that middle time in life. And we're actually moving to the Vata phase. And so this transition leads to a natural reduction in all the things that Heather was talking about. And from the Ayurvedic perspective, we consider that it results in a disruption in the flow of the energy, in the flow of the prana, in the flow of the vital life force. So one of the key things from an Ayurvedic perspective is it goes back to this spiritual sense of healing, that personalized healing is really important. If we go back to that phrase that I said, prevention is better than cure, that you want to be considering these things early on in your life, that you are healing, you are developing yourself, you are focusing on self-development, because by the time you come to perimenopause, it's everything that you've experienced in your life, it's a climax. So that's your childhood experiences, that's your if you've had children, that's your birthing experience, if your relationships, positive, negative, it's the accidents that you might have had, it's emotional experiences throughout your life, eating, exercising, family pressures, financial pressures, all of these things culminating at that time. So it's really important that we're considering these things as we move through life, that we're not, waiting till we start to see symptoms and then starting to adjust our bodies to be able to cope with the change and the shift that's taking place. And so, I guess menopause from the Ayurvedic perspective it's really everything is, again, just really agreeing with everything that's been said as well, that it's completely individualized. It's not one size fits all. Every woman's experience is going to be unique to them, because we all have our own unique personal journey. And so when it comes to self-care, it makes sense then that your self-care regime should be completely individualized to that journey. And did you want me to talk about that now, Reena?
Actually, I'm thinking what might be an idea is we'll deep dive on that particular topic in one of our future sessions. So we will talk about individualized care, because I think so the point that you're making, which is beautiful about Ayurvedic, is the whole spectrum, right? From physical into mental, into emotional, into spiritual, and that proactive, where, we've heard about yoga, meditation, but it's also about diet and nutrition, because that's where the energy comes in, and that's what impacts the disbalance or the balance of the doshas. So beautifully put in there. So may I, with your permission, segue into that conversation around what we eat, because that has a huge impact. And I know weight is a big issue that people come up to. So it's almost like a seamless segue into you, Nigel. If you could just explain to us, with your experience, what's happening, what do you hear, what do you suggest in counsel people?
Thank you, Reena. And I think without doubt, from a dietitian's point of view, what I'm looking at when I see a woman experiencing perimenopause and menopause, I'm thinking about her bone health, I'm thinking about her heart health, her digestion, her potential for what we call the metabolic syndrome. So a difficulty in coping with carbohydrates in the same way that she might have done previously, with insulin resistance. I want to see what her cholesterol levels are doing and what her blood pressure is doing, and other markers that might be what we call precursors for complications, really, of life after 45 or 50 for most women. These are conditions that are almost lifestyle conditions, things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, some forms of cancers that have been bubbling away under the surface for decades and then start to rear their head around this time. That's what I'm looking for. When anybody arrives at my clinic, the only thing they're really interested in is, why on earth have I gained all this weight around the middle part of my body? Why doesn't my bra fit? Why don't my trousers fit? Why don't my jackets and blouses fit in the same way that they used to? And without doubt, what we know is perimenopause, menopause is a perfect storm for weight gain. The evidence tells us about 50% of women will gain at least 1.5 kilos for each year of their perimenopause. And as Heather explained, that's 6 or 8 years on average for most women. So it's no surprise that women are gaining 10 kilos on average over that perimenopause. That's 1.5 stones. That's a good dress size, and particularly irritating when it's all in one area where women wouldn't normally be expected to gain weight prior to menopause. So what's going on? And I should also say the evidence tells us it's 50%. I reckon it's much higher than that, but that's what we're going on at the moment. Now, what's going on? Well, first of all, that falling level of estrogen, that gift that keeps giving and bringing all of these different symptoms along, has a role to play here. It's not the falling levels of estrogen that's making you gain weight. It's determining where the weight is going. So prior to menopause and perimenopause, estrogen was giving you that female shape, that slightly nipped in waist. As you move into perimenopause and menopause, you start laying that weight down, that excess fat around your middle, and essentially start laying fat down like a bloke. You become much more straight up and down. The reason, though, that is happening is due to metabolic changes, which are meaning you need fewer calories each day to function. And it might only be 100, 200 calories a day, but that's a 2-finger Kit Kat. It's a slice of bread and butter. And without making changes to your lifestyle, you're going to struggle to avoid it. Once a woman understands that, I think, in my experience, she's much more willing to look and think, all right, so what's my part in this? And generally what it is, women are not struggling with their weight because they're sitting and eating pie and chips and 6 pints of lager a night, or downing donuts. Women know they don't need to do that, or that they can't get away with it. But generally what's happening is the habits that have built up in your 20s and 30s of maybe being on or off a diet, being good or bad, that black and white thinking tends to mean that the habits you've picked up over those decades, you just can't get away with them anymore. The beauty of menopause is this is a moment to pause, to take stock, and to really readdress your lifestyle. And it's the sort of thing, I think, you know, the biggest battle I tend to have is to say, wait a minute, you don't need to intermittent fast. You don't need to go on keto. You don't necessarily need obesity medications. What we need to do is right under your nose. The reason the UK is one of the fattest nations on earth is because we drink too much booze, we eat too much saturated fat, we don't eat enough fruit and veg, we don't eat enough fiber, we eat too much salt, and we don't move enough. Now, with the vast majority of women, when I actually look at what they're doing, and when women are ready themselves to look at what they're doing, they start to see that some of those issues are actually part of their story. They maybe are going for long periods throughout the day without eating well, and then finding they sit down and eat the same size meal as their teenage sons or their male partner. You can't do that. They often find that through different forms of diets that they've tried, they're cutting whole food groups out of their diet and then absolutely ravenous, that their meals are simply not balanced. They're eating really quickly and missing the normal signals that our body tells us is that it's had enough. Satiety. We don't recognize that anymore. And of course, it's totally reasonable. If you've gone for weeks living on 2 hours sleep a night, if your mood is all over the place, if you can't remember things that you used to, if you're struggling at work or at home with different issues around cognitive function, if you have no energy, I think it's perfectly reasonable to think I'm going to have a big glass of Sauvignon tonight to try and get myself to sleep. Or I'm feeling so rotten, give me a Snickers bar. You know, so you generally find small habits start creeping in. And that's what we need to address. You can do this slowly and you can do it really soundly. It's all about now building a lifestyle plan that is going to be lifelong. You are going to be menopausal for the rest of your life. So whatever you do now to manage your weight and your health, you're going to need to do it forever. But you don't have to do anything fancy. You don't have to do what celebrities do. You can keep it simple and you can be the 85-year-old woman that other women look at and think, flipping heck, I want to be like her. And you can do it with normal tweaks and changes to your lifestyle.
Fantastic. I love that. Small tweaks, but lifelong lifestyle changes. Well said, Nigel. And it connects up beautifully with what Sunita was talking about, just getting your energy levels right with the right kind of food you eat. So thank you very much for that. And of course, you said keep it simple, which made me immediately think about neuroscience, because I'm like, my gosh, that is the principle. So I'm going to segue straight into the last bit of a conversation of just providing another insight about menopausal care, because one of the things that gets impacted is your cognitive functioning, because everything that you're going through, not just the hormones, but the challenges that women experience at mid-career. So Maria, can I invite you in to probably give a taster and teaser about neuroscience and what we learn about the brain on that one, though I know that we're going to deep dive in one of our future events. So Maria, over to you. And you might want to unmute yourself. So I can
Thank you so much, Reena. Yes, like you
Thank
said,
you,
we are going to take a deep dive in another session, but just want to focus on the brain's overarching organizing principle, because regardless, this happens all of the time. But during menopause, when we get all of the symptoms people are talking about, and it's so interesting that every plan is individual because our brain wiring is as individual as our fingerprints. So that really doesn't surprise me. And the wonderful thing about neuroscience is, although it's incredibly complicated, it's also really simple and it gives you really elegant tools. And the reason that Reena and I, she's an applied neuroscience specialist, and we just really enjoy neuroscience, is it gives you a manual of the operating system of your brain. And once we know how something works, we get a great deal more agency and a great deal more better management, better chances. Because I don't know about other people in menopause, but you're at the height of your career very often. You are really cooking with gas. And then suddenly some of the symptoms can really, really be destabilizing. And the thing being, the brain's first and foremost job is to keep us alive. Its first operating principle is to keep us alive. So it's scanning for danger 15 times a second. And it's doing that without people knowing. I always go like that. And the brain was made to move us away from threat and towards reward. And the thing is, if you're scanning for danger 15 times a second without really, you're not aware at all, what is happening is if any threat at all is perceived, all of the energy is taken away from our cognitive capacity, the PFC, just located behind the forehead, where all of our executive functions are happening, and we go into ultimate survival mode, which is flight, freeze, and faint. And a lot of people are getting very familiar with that language now. And the difficulty is, as estrogen goes down, cortisol goes up, and cortisol is part of the chemical combination that puts us into fight, flight, or freeze. We get adrenaline, we get cortisol, and suddenly we're not thinking straight. And the symptoms very often, a woman stood there in a meeting, I had it myself one time when suddenly I was so hot, I went from 0 to 60, and my brain perceives that as a threat. And then suddenly I'm limbic, I can't think straight, and I'm not functioning as well as I want to be. So that's why we're using the lens of neuroscience, because it gives us great insights in what can we do then to stop this limbic PFC seesaw that happens. And one of the things that we can do is you can't stop it happening. It happens instantaneously and it happens automatically. If I perceive a threat, my entire limbic system takes over, because that's the ancient early or morning survival system. That takes over, turns off my thinking, and I'm now only got the 4 choices of fight, flight, freeze, or faint. I can't stop that. No one can stop that. But what we can do is when we recognize it and we're aware of it's happening, we can mitigate it. And I'm going to give a couple of tips, one of which is to go away and think about. So this is a tip to take away. It's called the SCARF model. If you type it into if you type it into YouTube, David Rock came up with it. And it's basically, I want you to think about the SCARF model. It stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and my mind's just gone blank.
We're having a moment. Fairness.
Fairness. That's so funny. Okay. Those 5 characteristics bring us out of the limbic cascade that happens to us suddenly, where we can't think and suddenly we're feeling really, really without any kind of agency. And they bring us back into a balance of that seesaw. So it starts calming down this limbic survival system and bringing back our thinking online. Now, David Rock, when you type in on YouTube, he uses it as an influencing model. However, what I want you to think about is, how do you talk to yourself in your brain? Because how we talk to ourselves, our internal narrative, makes a massive difference. If I'm suddenly stood there and I think, right, I can't think, and then I am beating myself up in my own brain and calling myself out for just suddenly being non-effective, I'm actually making my limbic cascade go higher. How we talk to ourselves and our brain is essential to how the brain works, because this is the first thing it does first and foremost. So if our internal narrative is negative and we're telling ourselves off, and traditionally we are much worse to ourselves than we would be to our best friend or our children. We can beat ourselves up. Women particularly, sometimes we've been a bit habited into that. I'd like you to think about the scarf model in relation to how you talk to yourself in your own head. So when it says about status, are you telling yourself you're rubbish? Because that's going to make you a bit more limbic, because you're being down on yourself. With the certainty, the difficulty with menopause, you're uncertain. It happens to you at times. It's just certain. It's out of your control. Not always, but sometimes the symptoms just hit you. So the certainty part is right. Okay, this is a menopause symptom. You know, one of the speakers said it earlier. Get to know your own symptoms, what comes and goes for you. I mean, I also know that during the waves of it, they change, but it's also becoming very compassionate about, okay, this is happening. I'm either perimenopausal or it's a menopause system, so that's okay. That certainty feels better. Autonomy. Ask yourself some questions. The minute you ask yourself some questions about it, what do I want to do? Your PFC is starting to come on. So that seesaw is beginning to balance up. Relatedness, this is one of the easiest, friend or foe. We tend to be very, very hard on ourselves, which the brain takes as us being rubbish at survival. So actually being your own best friend, it's a cliche, but it actually works in terms of brain chemistry. It decreases the cortisol. It decreases the adrenaline. And fairness. You know, how many of you with children know that there is a phase when, unless it's fair, it's going to get pointed out, there possibly is going to be a tantrum. And the thing is, fairness, are we being fair to ourselves? One of the reasons that I am so happy to be part of this is 51% of the population, you know, like Amantha said, what are the strategies? Is it fair? We go through this because we had the ability to have children, and this is another phase. So it's also about being fair to ourselves. You know, I'm not okay today. That's okay. So I'd like you to look at the SCARF system and actually take some notes and deep dive into how you think of yourself, about yourself, talk to you.
Thank you so much, Maria. That's brilliant. I know people are probably going to go and Google the SCARF model the way that you've explained it out. But I think so the point that you're making, which is so eloquently said, is that during menopause, whether it's physically you're getting impacted, the symptoms come onto you, you're facing a system which is not very friendly towards you, that puts you into a limbic mode. And when it puts you into a limbic mode, the problem is it gives you only 3 choices: fight, flight, or freeze. So you don't get a chance really to kind of do anything else, which is collaborate or take really sane decisions or ask for help, because you just got into the limbic mode. So nice one. And we will deep dive a little bit more upon that topic. As it happens always in these sessions, I find that time just flies by. And I'm like, I had at least 10 other questions. But luckily, we do have the series that's going to continue. And we have a couple of questions that have come up as well over here. I'm almost tempted to kind of look at some of those. Let's see whether we can have a couple of questions, and then I'm going to ask a quick wraparound from people around the room. Or hang on a second, let me have a quick look at a question. SCARF model, there's a question for you, Maria, but I'd recommend if you just put in that on the Google and have a look around it. Question for Sunita, any websites you would recommend for learning more about Ayurveda and menopause?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. There isn't one that jumps out, but I have a free webinar. Reena, I can send you the link and then you can forward it on, and that's got lots of information in it and lots of supplements and different things that you can take.
Awesome. Nigel, quick question for you. Good one for me as well. Any tips for dealing with food cravings?
Yes, 100%. Eat regularly. Make sure that you snack mid-morning, mid-afternoon, so that you don't let yourself get too hungry. And if you are struggling, then try the 15-minute rule. So when you get a craving, give yourself 15 minutes. Don't say, I can't have anything. A craving generally is just a few minutes long. It will pass. If it doesn't, just let yourself have a planned, calm snack rather than maybe what it is that you're craving.
Again, going back, calm yourself down. Otherwise, the more you're limbic, the more you're going to get into, I got to eat more to just calm myself down. So great connection out there as well. I'm going to actually request all the speakers to kind of have a quick last word in, because before we close today's recording, and as I mentioned, this conversation is going to continue. So Heather, can I start off with you? Quick closure, what's coming to you having heard all of this, and your final message to us?
What's coming to me is how complex this is, and varied, and individualization is the key. And it's great to hear about all these different things that are available to all of us, how much we can do ourselves. As a medic, yeah, my interest is around the science and what about HRT, what's the good bits, what's the not so good bits, but there's so much more to it than that. And it's great to get the conversation away from HRT. There is a promotional stuff around everyone should take HRT and take it forever. And this is a great evening of discussion showing that absolutely that's not the case. It's helpful for some women, but there's so much more we can all do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Heather. Absolutely agree with you on that one. Amantha, final word from you?
Yeah, I would say this is your time to step in, not step down, step out, or step back. This is the world needs you. We need women in leadership. We need women in work. And the only reason you should be stepping back is because you want to, or to step into something else. So the law is on your side. And if there's anything we can do to support you, please just look at the information we're putting out on LinkedIn. The information is there.
Thank you, Amantha. Fantastic. Sunita?
I agree with everything again that's being said, and also that it's embrace this transformative stage in your life. Traditionally, this is the time where we would be looking up to women as they go into this phase of life. Certainly in India, that's what you would have there. And so, walk your path with vibrant health, take care of yourself with personalized self-care and regime, and there's plenty of things that you can do around that. So do more of a deep dive into seeing what works for you.
Absolutely. And it's because of the way it's viewed in India that we've called this the Wise Woman series, because we really think this is the age of wisdom. So thank you for that, Sunita. Nigel?
Yeah, 100%. Your body needs nutrition. It needs nurturing. There is no space in menopause for quick fixes, fads, or gimmicks. If you want to do it, change your diet, think lifelong lifestyle. And if you're thinking about a change, ask yourself, can I do this for the rest of my life? If you can't, simplify it.
Thank you. Maria, final word to you.
Building on what Nigel just said and all of the things, the brain changes, neuroplasticity, incredible capacity of the brain, but it changes incrementally, tiny. It's not big quantum leaps, it's little by little. So I think that's what I would like to end on. Let's do everything, but little by little, but powerful and with huge agency, because there's a wealth of experience in menopause. Absolutely.
Thank you, Maria. And I'd like to really extend a very heartfelt thanks to our speakers. I know that Sunita has had to leave us because she had another meeting, and so do all of them. But before you go, thank you for your time. I think so it's fair to say that you've brought in different facets, but this is a start of a conversation. And I really implore people to kind of be really curious about it and get to know more about this topic, because your health is so important. And as Amantha was saying, we need transformational leaders at this moment of time. So we definitely want you to look after yourselves. And in fact, just to continue the conversation, we're going to be back on the 2nd of November to broaden the conversation of saying, beyond menopause, what is it that mid-career women are going through at this moment of time? There's a whole plethora of challenges that they're experiencing. So we're going to be talking about refining and owning the mid-career narrative that you have, so that you can lead yourself and your teams in your business and communities with far greater prosperity and happiness, but also become an agent of change. But thank you so much for your time today. Absolutely delighted to have you here. We will send the recording to you. But in the meantime, take care, stay well, and stay safe. Thank you very much. Bye for now. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, Amantha, Heather, Maria, Nigel, Sunita. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. And bye, everyone.